Space was never silent. Not really. Even inside the cramped hull of the Helios 3, the deep hum of the ship's reactor never stopped. The air systems groaned, pressurized vents hissed, and beneath it all was the distant, eerie crackling of Saturn's magnetosphere. It was a constant, electric whisper, as if the universe itself was muttering secrets. Commander Alec Vance barely noticed anymore. He was too focused on what lay ahead: Titan, Saturn's largest moon, a world wreathed in eternal storms and cloaked in an atmosphere of thick, hazy gold. Final approach in 60 seconds, reported Lieutenant Nia Caldwell from the cockpit. Her voice was steady, but there was an edge to it. Everyone felt it, because this mission wasn't about discovery. It was about finding out why Helios 2, the first expedition, never came back. Turbulence is increasing, said Dr. Luis Ortega, their geologist, gripping his harness as the ship rattled. I thought the upper atmosphere would be the worst of it. It should be, Caldwell muttered, adjusting the thrusters. Something's wrong. The winds screamed against the hull. Readings spiked erratically. Titan's weather was always chaotic, but the storm ahead was different. It wasn't following the expected patterns. Its formation was unnatural. Stay sharp, Vance said, strapping in beside Caldwell. We get down there, we find out what happened, and we get the hell out? No one spoke, because everyone had read the last transmission of Helios 2. Garbled. Distorted. A single sentence, repeated over and over before the feed cut to static. They're still screaming. The Helios 3 cut through Titan's thick haze, breaking through the storm with a bone-rattling jolt. Alarms blared. Vance gritted his teeth as the ship shuddered, the landing thrusters barely compensating for the violent downdraft. Hang on! Caldwell shouted. They hit the surface. The impact slammed through their bones, but the ship held. A moment of ringing silence followed, then the creak of metal settling. Vance exhaled. Status? Caldwell checked the instrument. We're down, but the storm's messing with our sensors. External readings are, she frowned. What the hell? What? Ortega leaned forward. Caldwell hesitated. The atmosphere's changing around us. Pressure fluctuations, rapid cooling, like something's affecting the environment directly. Dr. Lin, their biologist, unstrapped herself, already pulling up the thermal scans. That's impossible. Titan's climate doesn't shift that fast, even with storms. Vance didn't like this. Suit up. We're going outside. The airlock cycled with a hiss. Beyond it, Titan stretched in endless twilight, an alien landscape bathed in a dull orange glow, its surface slick with frozen hydrocarbons. The storm had passed, but the air still felt wrong, thick with something unseen. The four of them moved carefully, helmets up, boots crunching against the ice-coated terrain. Helios 2 landed 2 kilometers east, Caldwell said, checking the NAV map. Should be a short trek. Vance nodded. Let's move. They trudged forward in silence, their visors cutting through the murky haze. Every so often, the wind carried distant sounds, faint, almost like whispers. Ortega kept glancing over his shoulder. I hate this place, he muttered. Lin checked her scanner. I'm picking up faint biosignatures. Could be residual data from Helios 2's crew. Vance kept his rifle ready. Or it could be something else. They climbed a jagged ridge and stopped dead. The wreckage of Helios 2 lay below them, half buried in Titan's frozen landscape. But it wasn't just a crash site. It was a graveyard. Bodies, twisted, frozen bodies, were scattered around the wreck. Helmets shattered. Suits torn open from the inside. The crew of Helios 2 had died violently. But the worst part, their mouths were still open, locked in silent, endless screams. Lin gasped. Ortega cursed under his breath. Caldwell stepped forward, shining her light over the ruins. No signs of battle damage, she murmured. It's like they've just died. Ortega knelt beside one of the corpses, scanning. No external wounds. But there, he hesitated. Jesus Christ. Their organs are gone. Lin stiffened. Gone? Vaporized. There's nothing inside them. Just empty husks. A chill ran through Vance's spine. He stepped forward, scanning the wreckage. Then his radio crackled. Static. Then, a voice. Faint. Distorted. They're still screaming. The blood drained from his face. Did anyone else hear that? Lynn's breath hitched. Commander, she pointed. That body. It just... Vance turned. One of the corpses moved. Not much. Just a twitch. A slight shift of the fingers. But it was enough. Ortega stumbled back, swearing. No. No, they're dead. That's impossible. Then another body moved. Then another. Caldwell's breathing quickened. We need to go. Now. Vance raised his weapon. Fall back. The corpses lurched. One of them, the captain of Helios 2, judging by his shattered nameplate, stood up. Bones cracked, ice flaking from his suit. His jaw hung open, but no breath came. His eyes were black. He screamed. It wasn't human. It wasn't natural. It was a piercing, hollow wail that rattled their helmets, bypassing the comms entirely. It was inside their heads, and the others joined him. Dozens of them. Lynn clutched her helmet. I can hear them. The dead rushed them. Move! Vance bellowed. They turned and ran. The landscape blurred around them. Titan's terrain was uneven, treacherous. Vance's breath came in ragged gasps as he pushed forward, hearing the things behind them, things that shouldn't move, shouldn't be alive. Lynn tripped. Vance turned, grabbing her just as the nearest corpse lunged. He fired. The energy round struck its chest. And did nothing. The thing didn't bleed. It just absorbed the blast, shuddered, and kept coming. Vance didn't stop to try again. He hauled Lynn up, forcing her forward. Helios 3. Do you copy? We need emergency evac. Caldwell's voice crackled with panic. Only Static answered. They ran for the ridge. If they could make it back to the ship. The wind howled. No. Not wind. A sound. A deep, resonant hum that vibrated through their suits, through their bones. Ortega choked. What is that? They reached the ridge. And stopped. The terrain had changed. The Helios 3 was no longer visible. The landscape had warped, twisted, great, jagged spires of obsidian-like rock now jutted from the ice, where nothing had been before. Where's the ship? Caldwell gasped. It was right here. Then the ground trembled. The hum grew louder. Vance turned. The dead had stopped chasing them. They stood, motionless, staring past them, toward the rift opening in the sky. A wound in reality itself. And something was coming through. Something that had been waiting. Something ancient. Lynn sobbed. No. No, no, no. The hum became a voice. It didn't speak words. It spoke in feeling. Hunger. Malice. Possession. Vance raised his rifle, knowing it was useless. The last thing he saw before the darkness swallowed them was the screaming faces trapped inside it. The darkness swallowed them whole. For a moment there was nothing. No Titan. No cold. No time. Just an abyss. Then, pain. Alec Vance fell, his body slamming into something solid. His helmet display flickered violently, red alerts flashing. His breath came ragged, heart hammering against his ribs. His visor adjusted. Titan was gone. He was somewhere else. The sky was a black void, writhing with unnatural shapes that slithered like living shadows. The ground beneath him was wrong. Not ice, not rock, but something porous, shifting like frozen flesh. Caldwell. Lynn. Ortega, he called out, his voice muffled inside his helmet. No response. Vance forced himself to his feet, his pulse a war drum in his skull. His suit's life support was still functional, but barely. The atmosphere outside had changed, something heavier pressing against his suit like unseen fingers. Then he heard it. A whisper. Not a voice, but a sensation, curling into his thoughts. It wasn't speech. It was knowing. A message not meant to be heard, but felt. You should not have come. A flash of movement. Vance spun. Caldwell stumbled out of the darkness, Her helmet cracked, her arm clutching her side. "Commander," she gasped. He rushed to her, gripping her shoulders. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, but her pupils were wrong, too dilated, like she had seen something she wasn't supposed to. I don't know where we are." The ship, her breath hitched. "I saw something take it. It was gone in seconds." A pit formed in Vance's gut. "And the others?" A new sound filled the air. Wet. Twisting. Something moving. Not walking. Dragging. Caldwell's head snapped toward the source. Vance followed. Ortega. He was staggering toward them, but something was wrong. His suit was partially melted, streaked with a dark, viscous substance that pulsed like liquid metal. His movements were jerky, unnatural, like a puppet yanked on invisible strings. His visor was open. His eyes. Black void. "Ortega?" Caldwell's voice was barely a whisper. He twitched. His mouth opened, wider than humanly possible. And then he screamed. It was a terrible, guttural wail, but not from his lungs. The sound erupted from the air around him, vibrating through their bones. The whispering in Vance's head turned into a roar. "You cannot leave." Ortega convulsed. Then something erupted from his back. A mass of writhing tendrils, black as space itself, tearing through his suit. His body shredded apart in an instant, sucked into the void of his own torso, like he had never existed. And in his place, the thing remained. It loomed, spindly and grotesque, its shifting form barely comprehensible. The space around it warped, the black tendrils merging with the landscape itself. Then it moved. Fast. Too fast. "Run!" Vance bellowed, shoving Caldwell forward. They sprinted into the darkness, feet pounding against the sickly ground. The creature screeched, the sound splitting the air like shattering glass. Lynn appeared ahead of them, stumbling out of the void, eyes wide with terror. What the fuck is that?" "No time." Vance grabbed her, yanking her along. The terrain shifted beneath them. The landscape was no longer stable, warping and twisting like a living thing. Ahead, a structure. Massive, monolithic, and wrong. Not a building. Not natural. A temple. It pulsed with the same dark energy as the creatures, its surface shifting like something alive. But it was their only option. "Inside," Vance ordered. They burst through the entrance. Just as the thing behind them lurched, its tendrils slamming against the threshold. Then it stopped. It did not follow. It only watched. Caldwell gasped for breath. Why didn't it come in?" Vance turned, staring into the abyss beyond. The creature still loomed at the threshold, shifting and writhing, but not crossing. Lynn swallowed. "Maybe it can't." Vance wasn't convinced. They turned. The interior of the temple was worse than the outside. The walls pulsed with an organic, vein-like structure, glowing faintly with a sickly yellow light. Strange, twisted symbols covered every surface, shifting whenever they tried to focus on them. And ahead, rows of figures, lined up, motionless, not statues, bodies, the Helios 2 crew. Suspended against the walls, their bodies impaled by dark tendrils, their mouths still open in silent screams. They were still alive. Their eyes twitched. Their fingers trembled. And then, one of them spoke, not with a voice, with a whisper inside their skulls. "We are forsaken." Lynn clutched her head. I can hear them. We are trapped. We are them. We are you." Caldwell backed away, her breathing ragged. No. Vance forced himself to stay steady. "What is this place?" The whispering shifted. A memory. A vision. A warning. Flashes of something ancient. Something vast. This place was not a temple. It was a prison. And they had just stepped inside. The walls moved. No. Not the walls. The bodies. They were shifting, their faces contorting, their screams changing. The Forsaken were awakening. And something deep inside the temple was waiting for them to go further. Vance turned to the others. "We have to keep moving," he said. "Because if we don't..." The whispering surged. You will join us? The temple was breathing. Not metaphorically. The walls expanded and contracted, a slow, sickly rhythm, like the lungs of something impossibly large. The pulsing veins along the surface oozed dark ichor, forming slick rivulets down the shifting walls. And the bodies? They twitched. Dozens of them, fused into the living structure, their mouths frozen in silent screams. Some still moved in sluggish, broken motions, their fingers curling, eyes flicking toward Vance and the others with something beyond pain. Something worse. A warning. We are forsaken. The words echoed in their skulls again. Not spoken. Not even thought. The message was simply. Vance forced himself to breathe. His ears still rang from the explosion. His hands shook, fingers twitching involuntarily, nerves frayed beyond repair. Lynn and Caldwell sat motionless in the frozen Titan dust, their chests rising and falling in ragged, uneven gasps. But none of them spoke, because above them the sky was wrong. Where there should have been stars there was nothing. No light. No distant celestial bodies. Just a vast, empty hunger spreading outward like ink in water. The monolith was gone. The temple was gone. But the thing they had freed was still here. And it was waiting. Caldwell swallowed hard. Tell me we didn't just break the universe. Lynn's voice was barely a whisper. We might have done worse. Vance exhaled sharply, forcing himself to stand. We're not dead yet. That means there's still a way out? Lynn looked at him, hollow-eyed. Commander, there's nothing left. She was right. The Deadless was gone. Their only way off Titan, their communications, their supplies, everything, had been wiped from existence. There weren't even wreckage or remains. Just empty, untouched terrain where their ship had once stood. But Vance refused to accept that this was how it ended. We find another way, he said firmly. Caldwell let out a bitter laugh. And what? Hitch a ride on a passing asteroid? We head for the emergency beacon, Vance said, his mind racing. The one we set up near the secondary landing site. If we can activate it, maybe. A sound cut through the silence. A whisper. Not in their heads this time. This one was real. Lynn turned sharply, gripping her rifle. Did you hear that? Caldwell was already raising her weapon. Yeah. And I really fucking wish I hadn't. The whisper came again. Closer. Vance turned slowly. At first, he saw nothing. Just the vast, barren Titan landscape. The methane haze swirling in the distance. The jagged, icy rock formations stretching toward the sky. But then, something moved. A figure emerging from the shifting mist. Human. Or at least, it used to be. Vance's stomach clenched. The suit was old. Ancient. Torn in places where the flesh beneath had fused into something not human. The helmet's visor was cracked, but through the splintered glass, two hollow black pits stared at him. It was wearing a Helios 2 patch. And behind it, more figures stepped forward. Dozens of them. Some were wearing NASA gear, others Soviet-era EVA suits, their insignias faded with age. Some bore no markings at all, their bodies twisted into things that had once been explorers, astronauts, pioneers. Now they were something else, something forsaken, and they were still screaming. Mouths open, faces frozen in agony, but no sound escaping. Just a whispering hum, a chorus of suffering radiating from their bodies like heat from a dying star. Caldwell's voice was barely audible. What do we do? Vance's instincts screamed at him to run, to move, to do something. But the moment he took a step back, the Forsaken moved too. Not fast. Not like a mindless, ravenous swarm. They matched him. Perfectly. If he stepped back, they stepped forward. If he raised his hand, so did they. Like a grotesque reflection in a shattered mirror. Lynn's breath hitched. Commander! Vance clenched his jaw. Don't run. Are you fucking kidding me? Caldwell hissed. They're mimicking us. No. They're waiting. Lynn tightened her grip on her rifle. For what? The answer came from above. A shadow moved in the sky. Not a ship. Not a storm. Something bigger. Something impossibly vast. The methane clouds swirled and split apart, revealing a shape that stretched across the horizon, an absence of light, an absence of existence, darker than the void itself. Vance's stomach turned to ice. It wasn't just here. It was everywhere. The monolith hadn't been a prison. It had been a door. And they had opened it. The whispering grew louder. The Forsaken raised their hands in unison, their fingers twitching in a rhythmic pattern, as if praying to the thing above. And then, it spoke. Not in words, not in thoughts, but in reality itself. The landscape shuddered, Titan's surface rippling like disturbed water. The ground beneath them softened, became something else. And the sky. The sky split open. The stars vanished, consumed by the abyss spreading outward, swallowing the universe one fragment at a time. Lynn screamed. Caldwell dropped to her knees. Vance refused to break. He turned to his team, his heart hammering. Move. Now. Caldwell snapped out of her daze. Where? There's nowhere to go. There's always a way. Vance turned toward the emergency beacon site. It was barely visible in the distance, a small, metal structure perched on the edge of a jagged ice cliff. Their last chance. Their last hope. He grabbed Lynn's arm, pulling her forward. We run. The moment he moved, the Forsaken moved too. But this time, they didn't just follow. They chased. The whispers erupted into a deafening roar, a soundless scream that shattered the air itself. The Forsaken broke into a sprint, their bodies distorting, stretching, their legs moving faster than humanly possible. Vance ran harder. Lynn stumbled. Caldwell pulled her up. The cliff's edge loomed closer. The beacon was there. But something else was, too. A tear in space itself, swirling, writhing, hungry. A wound in the fabric of the universe, growing larger by the second. The Forsaken weren't running toward them. They were running toward it. Lynn realized it first. Oh my God, they're not chasing us. Vance's mind raced. The Forsaken weren't trying to kill them. They were trying to escape from whatever was coming next. Caldwell reached the beacon first, slamming her hand against the activation panel. The device hummed, flickering to life. A transmission signal flared, sending a desperate ping into the void. It wouldn't save them. But maybe, someone would hear it. The sky cracked. The ground split open. And in the final moments, as the thing above descended, Vance saw everything. Not just Titan. Not just the solar system. But all of it. The universe itself. Collapsing. Folding inward. As if the thing above had simply decided it was done existing. Lynn screamed. And then, there was nothing. Not darkness. Not death. Just absence. Somewhere light returned. A distant, blinking signal. Drifting. A distress beacon, lost in the endless expanse. A transmission repeating on loop, carrying the final message of an expedition that should have never been. This is Commander Elias Vance of the Deadless Mission. If you hear this, do not come to Titan. Do not look for us. Do not listen to the whispers. The beacon flickered. A shadow moved across the stars. And then, the transmission stopped.